This is Andrew Benioff with the Aikido Vanguards project. I am here today with Yahe Solomon Sensei, 7th Dan, directly affiliated with the Aikikai Hombu Dojo in Tokyo, Japan, but based out of Montana. And we're here to discuss his past experiences with his instructor, Chiba Kazuo Sensei. Last dojo that he was with was the San Diego Aikikai. Solomon Sensei, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, this is great. Thanks for having me.
So if we could start by having you give us some background on when you first met your teacher, Chiba Sensei, and how you began training in Aikido.
Well, I started training in Aikido with Nakazono Sensei back in 1971 when I was a little boy. My mom just kind of got me connected with him. My dad passed away when I was around that age, so she felt I needed some sort of mentor figure, and she picked the right guy for it in Nakazono Sensei and his son Katsuharu Nakazono Sensei. Both of those are my teachers, and I was very fortunate to have that early experience with them. Very traditional dojo. There was, it's not done anymore, certainly in the United States, but for instance, you'd have black belt men on one side of the mat, and then below them white belt men, then the women, then the children. So he used to keep that kind of a very traditional order. And the training was very, actually physically very demanding, even from an early age. It was quite difficult. If you wanted to go work with the black belt men, you kind of had to challenge yourself to go up the ranks, and they were not going to take it easy on you. So a little embarrassing to say, but I used to, try and then get kicked down and come crying back down. But I think around 12 years old, I stopped crying, and I just could deal with it, So he was an old judo guy, and a lot of his classes were purely just Koshinagi. Everything was finishing with Koshinagi. So that was a very good, strong introduction to traditional training. I had gone to his medicine school and graduated in 84 and got my New Mexico license in Doctor of Oriental Medicine. And then I just had a calling that I wanted to pursue Aikido more. And it was one of those things that's a little bit non-linear in the way I looked at it. I looked up to my teachers so much, and I knew that they were masters of martial arts. And I knew to do what they did and the type of level of healing that they did, I had to become a master myself. And I knew that wasn't going to happen by accident, and that I had to really go after it. And that there's a certain level I had to get to. And so I asked Katsuharu Sensei's recommendation about where I should go. And I had a foggy notion in my head of going and training in Japan. That was my initial idea. He said, no, Chiba Sensei is the best one. You won't find anybody anywhere that's as good of a teacher as him. And that was it. And so I fortunately, probably the next month or so, he just showed up and was doing a seminar in Santa Fe, because he and Nakazono Sensei, senior Nakazono Sensei, were friends. And he came and he taught this class, and I of course took it. And as soon as you see him, he has such a sense of presence and power. And what you could feel immediately, what I could, was a profound sense of methodology he just carried with him. Like immediately, he's coaching you, he's training you. He's not taking anything but what he wants to get out of you. And I was like refreshed and impressed that there was somebody who had that much vision and structure to him. And then, so I just made plans to go over to San Diego after I was done with school. And I think literally within a month, I moved to San Diego and started working with him. And shortly, a month or two thereafter, he allowed me to join the Uchideshi program. Although there was no actual Uchideshi program at the time, Juba Noor was his Uchideshi, but he said I could be his Uchideshi along with Juba. And so we lived in the dojo and practiced and together, and that was the deal. So. And
how old were you when you entered the dojo for the first time, San Diego Aikikai?
19.
19 years old. Okay. And
yes.
So I guess it brings me to my next question, which is, how long were you a direct student of your teacher, and how often did you have direct instruction?
Well, that's a funny thing, you know, the way he operates was very daily life is training and training is daily life. So once I was Uchideshi, I saw him on a daily basis, constantly interacting with him, and I had to take care of the dojo. The first dojo, he was right next door, so we were always interacting with him, Juba and I. And then over the years, I mean, there was like I was Uchideshi officially for him for 8 years. 2.5 of those, I was Uchideshi in Hambu Dojo, living in Hambu Dojo as Doshu's Uchideshi, so to speak. But I still consider myself Chiba Sensei's Uchideshi because he got me in there. He made sure I still considered myself that as part of the program. So whatever you want to do the math on of that, I would say that's like, 5.5 years of interacting with Chiba Sensei a lot. Certainly, the last stint of it, which is almost 2 years in the last dojo, the Fairmont Dojo, was Ismail Hassan Sensei and I were the only 2 people living in the dojo with Chiba Sensei. So he had an apartment in the dojo. And that was very, very intense. As you know, Chiba Sensei is a very intense man. But it was fantastic. I wouldn't trade it for anything ever.
So I think I've mentioned this to you before. At a very different level and different part of my life, I was also at Hombu Dojo, and actually while you were there, in the late '80s, early '90s.
Right.
How was that experience? Obviously, your experience was very different from mine. I was not living there. I was not a direct student of anybody. I was just taking classes. But for a number of years, I was there. I expect that your experience was quite different than mine of being there. Was it difficult for you? I don't believe there were any other foreign live-in students at Hombu Dojo while you were there, that I knew of at least.
Well, there were not initially. There were a couple of people that came over and visited for a short time. There was Wilco Vriesman. He came over for a few months. And then Plamen Yorikov, he was there for a couple of months too, who I still have a good connection with, and very serious guy, trained really good. There was a gentleman named Sasha somebody or other, I don't remember his last name, came from Russia for a little while. And there may be a few if my memory's mistaking me. And I think for about the last 6 months of my stint there, Tony Hind Sensei, who's a teacher up in Canada now, came in. So we were there, we had some crossover there. But certainly for the beginning of it and most of it, I was the only Caucasian, that is true. And it was to get to your point about the energy of it and what it was about, it was very, man, the word's not lonely, the word's not frustrated, but if you could kind of squeeze that and take a drop out of it, it would be something like that. Lost, confused, unnerving, uprooting. Like I remember being in the bathroom and looking in the mirror and going, who am I? You know, because the cultural anchors are completely different. So very, very life altering, ultimately in a good way, but it was very uncomfortable initially and very like, whoa, like really knocked around. But the people around, the Japanese guys were tremendously friendly and helpful to me. Especially the senior instructors were great. Mr. Kurabayashi, who I have tremendous respect and love for, he was absolutely wonderful for like cluing me in. Okay, here's what you do then, and and when somebody tells you something, here's how you act, here's how you don't act. Because you've been in Japan, you know the deal. It's everything in Japan is very specifically a certain way. It's not just any old way, the way we are here in the States. So there was there's a big learning curve involved, and I felt quite lost, quite stupid constantly. And then learning the language, that's a whole other overlay. I as you know, these Japanese is it's very intuitive and situational language. So you have to really get a feeling for the situation, what everyone's relationship is. And then you start to interpret what's happening through that. So that's a whole different mindset than this means that means this. And it was difficult for me, even coming from Chiba Sensei, who was actually not as, he was not as rote about anything. He was more of a free form, whatever I can do to poke you to get you growing now. That was kind of his MO. Whereas Japan, it was more just fitting in with the culture. So they're different kinds of difficulty, so to speak.
Very interesting. I'd like to ask you to give me 3 adjectives that describe your teacher, Chiba Sensei, and I'd like you to explain why these are important and how your teacher personified these traits, if you would.
That's a good question. I have to think about that a little bit. I'll just sort of go with the ones that pop into my head, I guess.
Great.
Passionate.
Why passionate?
He was passionate about what he does. He had a sense of mission about him that was unmistakable. He had a sense of mission of transmitting Aikido in a way that had not been done before. That he had this passion to take Aikido that was something that was sort of, there was an essential quality to it, and he was very passionate about bringing it out and teaching it and making it a usable system. It was as though he took something that was amorphous and he put a physical form to it, and he was constantly handing it out to people, and was absolutely dead resolved about what he was doing and 100% sure of himself, actually. He changed his methodology, but here's a man who didn't just take Aikido as face value and say, okay, I get to practice it and enjoy it. He said, how do I get to what I call quality Aikido is? How do I get that across? How do I get that a point across? Because not everybody's going to be a sensei student, but what do I do to get this to happen? And for him, he combined Iaido, weapons, and Zazen, along with just kind of his own methodologies of getting into those. And in effect, was able to squeeze the essential quality out of Aikido, and was absolutely passionate and adamant that that was what he was doing and not something else. And anybody who wasn't into that, go somewhere else, no hard feelings, but this is what he was doing. So that sense of passion and commitment was absolutely unmistakable. And actually, for me, touching, because it comes from the heart. You know, he was a man who lived from his heart. His methods were tough. He was a tough coach, really tough coach. But like all tough coaches, that's what it takes a lot of times to get things to happen. And you can really feel that with him. The other adjective I would say is creative. Unbelievably creative. Once again, he's taking something that's amorphous, that he knows is there, and he's got to get it to happen. And his level of creativity of how he did it was remarkable to me. Like I never, like if I wouldn't see him for a year, I would notice that he'd grown as a teacher, grown as a practitioner, if I would even dare to say such a thing, but I had that eye for quality. Amazingly creative. He was constantly developing systems, new ways of getting to people, new ways of putting out what he had. And it was this evolving process. I've never seen anybody quite that creative along the lines of teaching. That was very, very powerful. And there was a real structure. That was the weird thing, is that when you think of the word creative, you think of somebody who's just, you know, they're going to make up poetry and go with their feelings. But he had this weird combination where he could be incredibly creative and he could be incredibly structured too. So he had that sense of structure that is required for transmission. And he'd pour his creativity into that. So really, he left a lot behind for everyone to use. So very, very impressive the more time I get from it. I'm looking for that third adjective. I guess it would be a combination of that, which would be groundbreaking. Like, no one ever did what he did. That's what I would say. He was completely different than any other Aikido teacher, in my opinion, in this ability to do, to transmit the essential quality of the art. Nobody had those type of eyes. I haven't seen it before. I haven't seen it since. I haven't seen it anywhere. I don't even have it myself, like to be able to do that to that level. I know what I need to do for myself and for my students, but that whole sense of like, this has never been done before. And he somehow out of thin air fished this together and put it together and created a system out of it. It was revolutionary in Aikido. And I'm going to go ahead and say in martial arts too, because there's a lot of martial arts out there. But for somebody to be able to take something that's Budo, what really is Budo, and absolutely be able to hand it to you on a dish and systematize it, that is groundbreaking. And I just have never seen that before. And you don't see that in many fields either. That was what was so amazing about him. So I'm forever grateful and I'm in awe of this ability that he had.
So what did Chiba Sensei say about his teachers and others in the preceding generations?
Okay, I get what you're asking me about his teacher, but what do you mean by others? Who are you talking about?
So I mean other, perhaps, so Chiba Sensei, I think, would consider his teacher Osensei Ueshiba Morihei, and then, yes, but he also might have mentioned other senior instructors who were influences on him, perhaps, for example, Saito Morihiro Sensei or Yamaguchi Seigo Sensei or those kind of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as Sensei, I'll tell you the God's honest truth. He actually didn't talk about him as much because it would, my gut feeling was it would be like telling a lot of stories about your mom. You just don't do it. On a heart level, like I think he loved Sensei so much that it just isn't something you talk about a lot. It was something that was kind of dear to him, and he kind of kept it close to the chest. He was not a guy to sit around and tell you Sensei stories. He rarely did that. And I thought he was a type of person who was very task oriented and focused, and going into a lot of that, I don't know if that suited his way that much. He would occasionally say things, but I really had the sense that he had just the kind of the energy and the inspiration and the magic, and that there was just like an electrical contact point that's almost too all pervasive to actually put into words that much. But it was very, very real, very evident, when you're around him, that you're around somebody who's magic-y, and I'm gonna say that I could actually add that as another adjective. He had magic around him, and I feel like that kind of came from Sensei. So kind of an intuitive, magical insight to people and teaching and martial arts that was very different, and that, I don't know if it came from just his level, but I feel like it kind of had his connection with Sensei was part of it. So as far as other teachers, I know he respected Saito Sensei tremendously. That was the one I remember. He used to model his methodologies. He'd take Saito Sensei's beginnings, because Saito Sensei was a great systematizer. Because he said Sensei would come out and do this weapon stuff and nobody could understand any of it. And you just kind of jump in and deal with it. But Saito Sensei would kind of systematize it, and Chiba Sensei said, hey, this is great. This is something to build on that I can teach people with. It's a beginning of a methodology. So in the beginning, when I was there at the old 4th Avenue dojo, he was pretty, if I'm honest, I feel like meticulous about going through some of Saito Sensei's methodologies, but changing them, tweaking them, making them more what he wanted. There was always a very, very personal flair to it. But he really did work on Saito Sensei's basic jokatas and a lot of his basic forms. But then he completely changed as they came through it. Addition to that, I know he really, really respected Yamaguchi Sensei a lot. That I know. He used to say that. Yeah, and then I've seen him. I was lucky to be a fly on the wall with he and Arikawa Sensei, and I could tell a great amount of respect there too. Tada Sensei, I know he had a lot of respect for also. So, and he was cool though. He was a very, a good martial artist. I could tell he didn't like, he'd never say anything bad about them. He was a real professional on that level. But those top 3, I know he really respected a lot. And Saito Sensei, it gave him like a beginnings of something that I'm going to say it went for the first several years that I knew him, 2 years, 3 years. And then he completely was something that looked different, a lot different. Yeah. Although, yeah, that's about where I can say is that happened.